Okay, what is this damn video? You can always leave. Okay, we're doing a moonwalk. What's the meaning of
Imagine
this?
you have a friend called George.
This story was misleading. George isn't being threatened, he's just being asked to pay his fair share like the rest of us.
What?
If he doesn't like the arrangement, he can always leave.
You're not providing the context.
Let's start with the question of whether or not the state threatens people. Imagine a desert island.
Okay.
Alden lives with a few other people.
Alden! Wait. Is this really from 10 years ago? This feels kind of prescient. Huh. So this was like the Garden of Eden for all the memes.
On this island. One day he meets Jeff. Jeff says,
That's me.
Give me your ball.
That's me.
Or you'll get a beating.
Jeff's threatening Alden with violence, right?
Yeah, of course. But taxpayers aren't being threatened like that. No one actually gets attacked for...
Okay, so is the argument that wait, hold on. I have a feeling this isn't about corporate coercion. This is instead about whether or not the government is coercing you by taxing you, to which the answer is it is. And it's good. So I feel like a lot of the arguments here are going to go over my head. Not over my head in the sense that I don't get them, but it's like they don't affect me. Because like, hey, did you know the state taxing you and threatening to arrest you if you don't pay your taxes coercion? I would say like, yeah, based.
not paying taxes.
The channel icon is an ANCAP flag. Thank you for being the 50th person to let me know about the fact that I can look at with my eyes as I watch a video on whether or not the state taxing you is coercion. Thank you for informing me that this person is indeed a libertarian.
Okay, let's have Jeff say something
Grumpy,
different.
grumpy, grumpy,
He
grumpy,
says,
grumpy.
Give me your ball.
If you don't, I'll have to ask you to hand over your ball and your shirt. If you still don't cooperate, you'll spend the night tied to that tree. And if you resist being tied,
You'll get a beating.
now Jeff's defenders could insist he'd never attack someone for something as trivial as refusing to hand over a ball. He'd only use violence as a last resort, as a penalty for breaking the rules and resisting the proper punishment. No matter how Jeff explains it though, he is still threatening Alden with violence, right?
Okay, yes, Jeff's still threatening...
Why is Josh getting so uppity over basic eye questions? Lamau, he's acting like Destiny. You're right, we're regressing back to the mean. You know, we're falling back into the toilet. You know what else Destiny does when chatters annoy him? Learn that one from my training in 10 years in the fires of DGG prepared me. It can ban a person in the blink of an eye. Omae wo mo banduru.
threatening Alden with violence, even if the violence is a couple of steps removed. But this isn't a good analogy for taxation. For one thing, modern states use taxes to provide services that help people.
Okay, so what if you learned that Jeff just wanted to improve Alden's ball and give it back to him as a surprise?
What? Wait, that's not an accurate description of the state providing social services. A better example would be the big guy. Alden is the big guy, right? Is the big guy Alden or the little guy Alden? Alden and Jeff. Okay. A better example would be like Jeff clearing passages through the jungle on the island and collecting the food on the island and setting it aside, and then like asking for the ball in exchange for the use of those services. Like this implies that the services being provided are utterly trivial and also only being done with the property taken, which is not the case. The state does this with property it already owns, like the roads.
I guess I don't see Jeff as so much of a bad guy anymore, but he is still threatening Alden, which isn't okay. There are more differences between Jeff and the state though. The state relies on taxation so that it can provide stuff that just wouldn't be possible otherwise, like roads.
Private roads do exist, you know.
Okay, this has always been the biggest cope art. You know how libertarians make fun of the but who will build the roads? The reason they make fun of it is because they don't have an answer for it. The road network, millions and millions of miles of roads that stretch between every house and every building. You ready to have a toll on all of them? Yeah, no. In terms of private roads, like the private roads being referred to are usually either driveways, on-property roads, or toll roads, which are often subsidized by the state anyway and maintained by the state.
Alright then, essential services like firefighters.
There are private fire services too.
Yeah, like in Rome, you know, those went really well. It's true. There are private fire. Okay, just because if the answer is going to be like, yeah, there's a private version of this. Yeah, no shit. There's a private version of everything. That's not like an argument in favor of its defense, you know? Like you can find wooden spoons. Like, don't we want spoons that are made of metal? Yeah, but there are wooden spoons. Like, okay, but I think metal spoons are better, you know? There are spoons made of paper, you know?
Well, what about a reliable social safety net? Charity alone isn't enough.
Before the compulsory welfare state crowded them out, there used to be lots of mutual aid societies.
Mm-hmm. And to show how effective they were, you can take a look at the poverty rate before and after FDR put in the New Deal programs, you know? The poverty rate, especially for elderly people, skyrocketed after all of those social reforms were put in place because all the charities closed down. Also, excuse me, how would a charity get muscled out by the existence of compulsory welfare programs? How does that work? A charity is charity. How does that, wouldn't they just work in tandem? How would they get muscled out? That makes no sense at all.
Together with charities, they did a pretty good job of taking care of the needy.
No. No. People lived packed in tenement houses. There were houses that were so packed and so poor that people would sleep by hanging their bellies over ropes. Multiple families would be stacked in a single room, and people would go long times without baths. Entire families would bathe together in a single pool of warmed water because they couldn't afford to warm multiple pools of it. Many elderly people, like most elderly people, died in poverty because once they could no longer work, they could no longer provide, and were often cast out by the family or accepted that they like needed to die, or everyone would like starve trying to feed them or whatever. That's literally the origin of the term hangover, by the way. That's how bad and widespread it was. Really? I didn't know that.
Anyway, for the sake of discussion, let's assume that there are some important things that can only be provided using taxation. So Jeff isn't...
That's sarcasm, or was it misspeaking when you said elderly death skyrocketed after FDR? It was sarcasm. It plummeted after FDR. Everything that I'm talking about, all the bad stuff, that was before the social programs. The 2-penny hangover? Jesus Christ. Guys, look at this era of charity-induced prosperity. A cheap Victorian-era doss house in which indigents could secure shelter and rest for the night more cost-effectively than for paying for a bed, which typically cost 4 or 5 pence. The idea was that in exchange for the payment, the poor would be allowed to sleep several men at a time draped over a rope that had been suspended across the room at chest level. Cool. I heard that's fake. These existed to some extent. I don't know if they were like crazy widespread, but the data that we have on poverty, starvation, and life expectancy is pretty objective.
Interested in Albin's ball anymore. Now he wants his gold coins. He's collecting money to build a fish farm. There was a serious fish shortage last month, and Albin agrees that a farm would be a good idea.
Is that better than sleeping on the ground? Yes. Because on the ground, people would like pee on you. I don't know.
He doesn't trust Jeff with his money. He'd prefer to use it in other ways. Jeff says, "The farm will benefit everyone, and everyone else has paid their share. It just wouldn't be fair if you didn't chip in."
That is true, yes. If everyone is going to benefit from the farm, in this like deserted island, it would be pretty fair if everyone chipped. I don't know what gold coins are going to do on a farm, or sorry, on an island, but okay.
That's why you'll get a beating if you don't hand over the money.
Jeff just wants to prevent Albin from free-riding on an improvement that will help everyone.
But isn't he still threatening Albin with violence?
Yes, and it's based.
All right. But in a modern democracy, it's the people who decide the law through their representatives.
This is such a bad argument. The skeleton should be like, yeah, and it's based, actually. Yeah. Yes. Yes.
That's very different to an island where there's no representation.
Okay, let's change things on the island to fix that.
Some of the islanders decide that there should be a ruler with certain powers that other islanders don't have. This ruler is chosen by a vote, and Jeff was the first winner.
I like how we're still on the island, but we have like Nixon with these cyberpunk security guards. Like, couldn't just be like a chief that was elected? That seems like a more likely way of how that would work.
Like before, Jeff is telling Albin to pay towards the improvements he has planned. If Albin doesn't surrender the money demanded, he'll...
I just tried to instinctively jump ahead to the next segment. Here, I'll help you. There. It's like time warping, and the next time you're in chat, it'll be a different segment.
Be told to hand over even more. If he consistently refuses, eventually, the island guards will show up at his house, take him away, and lock him up. When his kidnappers arrive, Albin could try to get them to leave by shouting a warning and drawing a weapon.
Whoa. Why even have this whole thing be a deserted island analogy if you're going to keep what are we talking? What the f is going on here? Jesus Christ! Put the gun down, man. Put the gun down. Oh my God.
But he realizes it's far more likely that he'll be killed than succeed in escaping the state's chain of demands and punishments. at least while he's staying on the island.
Wait. Police officers aren't killers.
Skeleton guy, you could be making better talking points, I gotta say. You could be like, yeah, the police are killers, and the one acceptable target is tax cheats. Like, you know, listen, okay, I disagree institutionally with the behavior of the American police officers in the system. However, the IRS and their glorious crusade is something that I dedicate myself wholeheartedly to. Thank you.
They don't usually need to be. But think about it like this. What do you think would happen if there was no danger to Albin of being killed, no matter how far he went in his resistance? If the guards just left people alone who defended themselves powerfully enough, word would get out that you could safely ignore their demands. I think a great many people would choose open resistance. I bet even those who liked the idea of a state would resist. They'd be asking themselves, why should I be the sucker paying a big chunk of my income for all these free
That's an interesting voice you chose to do. Okay.
riders when there's a safe and easy way out?
The guards hardly ever use actual violence against people like Albin. As long as most people at least have the idea that resistance is futile, that's enough to keep the state functioning.
That is true. The state is an entity that maintains a monopoly on violence.
Because the guards very rarely need to use violence, people might even forget that the state is ultimately ready to use deadly force to secure obedience.
Yes. Hey, quick question. In a libertarian society, what would happen if two entities agreed to a contract and then one side broke it? Oh, you'd take them to a third-party court. What if they didn't show up? Oh, you'd repossess you. Okay, what if they had a gun? Oh, well, you'd hire guards to... Oh, okay, what if they fired at you? Oh, wow, we arrived at the exact same position. It turns out the only way to ever make anyone do anything for sure is to point a gun at them. Turns out that's how society works. Moving on.
Yes, okay, so maybe taxation does depend on threats of violence. But that doesn't mean that taxation is theft. Every citizen is bound by the...
Taxation isn't theft because theft doesn't just mean any time you take or get something. Theft is a specific legal thing that happens. Taxation is just... The ultimate reason why taxation isn't theft is because money is printed by the government and given out to the people within a given area as a way of facilitating commerce with the expectation that it ultimately be used to enable the power of the state. Like, currency doesn't come from a tree branch, right? The U.S. Mint, the Treasury, they print dollars and coins and such because they want to facilitate commerce, but that doesn't come for free. It costs money to print and distribute, to maintain. U.S. fiscal policy is incredibly complicated. None of this happens for free, you know? That's why the analogy keeps saying gold coins. Yeah, but even then, even if we didn't have a fiat currency, there's still a lot of regulatory stuff that goes into gold. It's not like we didn't have a Treasury Department before we dropped the gold standard, you know?
social contract. You live in a country knowing what's expected of you, and what the punishments are if you don't follow the rules. If you really don't like the terms, most states do allow you to leave. And I know what you're going to say. I never signed a social contract. But that doesn't matter. When the bill arrives in a restaurant, you have an obligation to pay, even though you didn't sign anything. It's the same kind of thing with the social contract. By staying in a country, at least after you're old enough to leave, you're agreeing to abide by the rules, and you're granting permission to have certain kinds of force used against you if you don't stick to those rules.
This is largely true. It doesn't seem very fair, because it isn't, but that's largely true, yeah. Also, who determines the value of the gold in the first place? Well, that's very complicated, okay? Let's not worry about that.
Hang on a second. The restaurant boss gets to set the rules because he owns the restaurant. It's being the owner of a thing that gives you the right to say who gets to use it and how.
Huh, interesting. All of a sudden, forcing people to do stuff, even if they haven't signed a contract, is okay as long as it's being done through a private property system. Okay, then what if just we replace the president with the CEO of America? Like, unironically, what if we just did that?
Some people say that a social contract exists between the state and the citizen. Okay. But how did the state come to be the owner of the land it imposes its laws on? It's important to know, because if it's not the owner, then the state has no authority to set the terms of use of that land.
Who decides who the owner is? The state. The thing that makes a person the owner of their property is that the state allows them to with a deed. It's that ownership is done within the context of the national boundary. Like, the United States of America gives you the legal title to the property that you own. Otherwise, other people could just, like, enter your land and you'd be like, well, I own it. And they'd be like, says who? What are you going to do then, huh? Well, you defer to a higher power, the state. The state is the one that negotiates this disagreement. Like this is very common to like libertarian brain rot, which is where they think the government is this like arbitrary, fake, like not real thing, and if you don't believe in it, it doesn't exist anymore. But they think that private property is this innate fundamental force of the universe. It's so funny. They do this every single time, you know? Like, yeah, man, the Chinese government in its sort of like semi-perpetuity for 4,000 years has no control innately over the land within its borders. But like, you know, Ming's orange chicken shop, which opened 6 months ago, actually divinely controls the land that it like outside any government, you know? I thought Vosh was an anarchist. Nothing that I'm saying right now is contradictory to anarchist politics. Acknowledging the contradiction between how libertarians treat governments and how they treat private property is just like a fact of analysis. Like it's just a fact of the world, you know? Any politically literate person should be able to identify this.
And it's actually aggressing against the people it taxes.
Some people
How?
don't believe that the state is the rightful owner of the land it claims. To
How?
understand why, think back to the island as it was right at the beginning, before we made all the changes. In some remote corner of the island, Albin finds some wood lying on the ground and uses it to build a hut there. Do you think that Albin owns the hut? Meaning, does Albin have the right to say how other people may or may not use the hut?
Yeah, sure. Albin's the owner.
Does Jeff have the right to demand that Albin follow a set of rules in order to continue using the hut?
Okay, wait. See, this is the contradiction. Then what about Alden being the government then? See, listen, this contradiction relies entirely upon you not being smart enough to understand that all of these arguments fall apart if you make the government argument from the other position around. What if Alden is like, oh, because I've built this hut, I'm declaring this my land, and then he goes out and makes little improvements around the island, or he's like, actually, this whole island is kind of like my front yard, you know? Like, why wouldn't it be? And then you have a government right there. The arbitrary, completely indefensible distinction is that Jeff is doing this in the framework of I am the government now, whereas Alden is doing this from the framework of I am the homesteading private property owner, when in reality, they're talking about the same thing. The reason for that, guys, is because all a state is a corporation that got really big. That's it. That's the only difference. Seriously. Think of like the mercantile period. What is the difference fundamentally between a protectorate state controlled by a corporation and a protectorate state that is controlled by an aristocrat? What's the difference between an aristocrat and like the East India Company, right? Controlling like parcels of land. What's the functional difference between an agent of the king and you know, like a corporate force? An army? No. Those corporations had armies, my friend. What is the difference? Size? Yeah, that's pretty much it. And even then, not really. You can find examples all across the mercantile period of there being very little functional difference between a corporation, which had an army, the right to levy taxation, dues and rent for land, and aristocrats who operated as like official envoys of the right of any given ruler. Except the corporations also did that. In the mercantile period, corporations were given seals and stamps from the king in many cases. So again, what's the difference? The answer is none. A corporation and a state are both just legitimizing mechanisms for power centralization. The only real difference is who has ultimate authority in a region. The government has the ultimate authority in a region where a corporation might have, you know, sort of local jurisdiction, but the same is the case for any local aristocrat. An aristocrat, like a lord or a baron or something, might have local authority, but they ultimately derive their authority from the king. So what happens if you have a corporation in an area with no king? That's right. The CEO is king. That's it. It's that simple. Congratulations, you've all got masters in political theory now. That's it. There's no functional difference between a corporation and a government. It really, the government is just the last corporation. It's the final corporation. It's the largest tier. It's the highest authority in any area, like in a jurisdictional sense. That's it. That's the difference. The modern nation state is just the current most efficient way of managing territory with consideration to the technological and social limits of the time. In the future, we might, you know, regress to something different. You know, there might be other systems that are materially incentivized. So anyway, this is the big contradiction with libertarian arguments. They are not consistently against or for any kind of power. They just arbitrarily decide they like it when corporations do it, but not when states do it. Do you know why libertarians like it when corporations do it and not when states do it? Because they hate black people. That's right. Modern day libertarianism is heavily influenced by the belief that the welfare state and programs provided by the government are ways of taking money from wealthy whites and giving them to poor urban people and all the colors of skin they have. You know, modern day American libertarianism is heavily influenced by the reactionary movements that have, you know, sort of like resented the gains of the civil rights movement, Martin Luther King Jr. and all that. They want to reinstate a system where they are free to inequitably distribute resources without having to worry about democracy or egalitarianism getting in the way of that disproportionate accumulation. As evidenced by the minstrel show earlier in the video, yeah, just a little bit. If corporations or states and states are the same, why are states better at governing and protecting people's well-being? Well, that's kind of a non-question. Right now, like as I said, states are just the final point of a corporation. Corporations exist in the context of having their power deferred to or at least accepted by states. But if there is no higher power, the corporation becomes the state. That's the origin of a lot of, you know, the world today. Like, think of America, guys. You realize that America's founding was like a ton of private venture capitalist types homesteading over here in the New World, right? Like corporations from England sent ships over here full of people that they could use to set up colonies and extol, like, you know, resources. There's not a fundamental difference. Now, of course, because this was a colonial state, or 13 states, you know, from the British, the king did have ultimate authority here. But what if the king didn't? What if those were just like private homesteaders? What if they weren't doing that under the you know, the permission of the British crown? Well, they would still be a government, wouldn't they? Right? Like, think about that. If all of those private ventures over to the New World hadn't been officially sanctioned by the king, if it had just been thousands and thousands of pilgrims and colonists and soldiers that were privately funded, you know, and created their own colonies, wouldn't they have just been governments? Right? What would the difference have been? In the long run, I would argue not that much. Now, of course, because a state is the ultimate authority in any jurisdiction, the one institution with the monopoly on violence, inevitably all territory on Earth will be drawn into statehood. And to a large extent, it already has, because everything has to have a final authority, right? Every speck of land on the globe has to have some government, some power that you can defer to negotiate contracts or whatever else. And so, as such, the entire world has been gobbled up by the state. No land exists outside of it now. Even the South Pole has theoretical land grabs made by a bunch of different nations, you know? The only reason we aren't actually fighting over it is because it's not economically viable to really colonize the South Pole. If it was, we wouldn't have a bunch of theoretical treaty-driven little land slices. There would be, you know, proper wars over it. Libertarians also do it because they directly benefit from it. No railroad company will donate to a party that is for socializing rail. Yeah, but a lot of people, I think that for a lot of libertarians, it's mostly about racism. Personally, I think a lot of it is about racism, just a little bit. Just think of a government as a big entity that is like the ultimate landowner within its borders, and is also like the ultimate contract dispute negotiator with its courts and with its private security. And we elect its leaders, and that's like the corporation, you know?
No, of course not. Jeff doesn't have the right to impose conditions on Albin because it's not his hut.
If Jeff physically removes Albin, does he then become the rightful owner of the hut?
No, Jeff would be in the wrong. The hut's...
Why not? What makes the hut rightfully anyone's, I ask you? Because in the complete absence of any other authority to defer to, in a practical sense, it's whoever can get it.
Still belongs to Albin. He built it.
What if Jeff announced one day...
Like, look at that assumption made. It still belongs to Alden? How does it belong? You're on a deserted island. What do you mean it belongs to? What does that even mean? Yeah, he took it from you. It belongs to him now. Like, in pre-modern humanity, if one tribe murders another tribe and takes their shit, does all the shit they took, like, not belong to them? No, they took it by conquest. What belongs to someone isn't an innate feature of the world. There's not some like physical quality of an object that determines its owner, you know? It's a social process. Ownership is a social process.
That he owned the uninhabited Northern Hills, even though he'd never visited them himself, and then attacked anyone who tried to use that land without his permission.
What if he had visited them? What if he had extensively traveled those northern lands? Does that then mean that it's okay for him to assert property ownership over it, even if he's just been there? Why do we have to add that he's never been there? What if he had been there?
Would that mean that the Northern Hills were his property?
No, that would just make him a bully. He wouldn't really own the hills.
Oh, it's according to who? What? What? According to who? Why? Who? Wouldn't really? According to who? The cloud? Yeah, I didn't realize this guy, the maker of this video, was against the concept of owning property you'd never been to. Oh, so you don't think that like a business owner should be able to buy a property they haven't personally visited? Do you believe that, person who made this video? Or is this a distinction you maintain only for the state? But corporation, like CEOs are totally okay to sign off on massive land purchases in places they've never been to.
That's what I think too. It sounds like you agree with me about the two ways a person can acquire property. First of all, you can homestead a thing. That means...
See, remember what I said about homesteading? Remember, homesteading is what governments do to cement their property claims, but it's also something corporations do to cement their property claims. There's no difference.
Means creating or improving something that wasn't previously owned. Building a shelter using unowned materials on unowned land is an example of homesteading.
How is it unowned materials and unowned land? What does that mean, owned? Why do you keep using these terms that involve like social contracts on a deserted island? That's not how any of this works. What if you randomly found out that the little deserted island that you're on, what if you suddenly realized, oh, I just realized where our plane came down. This little island is part of a small archipelago that's actually owned by a corporation. Yeah, there's like a big fruit company that owns this archipelago. They don't do anything with the land. They just own it because they acquired it in like some big 200-year-old land deal. They've been sitting on it, you know, but it's their land. So does that mean you just die? No, serious question. What happens then? Property-wise, you're now no longer allowed to be there. Like, that's not your land. You're going to take their trees, their food? What about that? What if you survived on the island for years and managed to build like a pretty nice little setup, you know? And then it's like, oh, well, actually the corporation owns all of this. Would you accept that? Do you think that's like morally correct? Because 200 years ago, this little forgotten island that's never been used or improved in any way by the corporation was bought up by them?
The second way you can become an owner is if a thing's previous owner voluntarily gives it to you.
How? What? How? According to what law? Find me the atom on the periodic table that says that you can only own something if... Oh, is that true? So does that mean that, like, we don't own, like, ancient Paleolithic artifacts because we never got an official sign-off on them from the previous owners? Surely you don't believe that ownership of an object ends the nanosecond you die, right? Because otherwise you could just kill a person and take their stuff and it wouldn't even be stealing. Obviously, that's not the case. You really believe you need signed permission from someone or any kind of, like, direct handoff?
This happens in trade, where the giving happens in both directions. There may be disagreements about exactly how you have to homestead something to become its owner, or how long you're allowed to leave a thing unused before someone else can claim it, but I think most people agree about the basics.
No. In fact, the homesteaders over here in the New World had some very strong disagreements with Native Americans on whether or not extensive use of the land meant they were more entitled to it than the previous people who walked it. After all, the Native Americans didn't own the land. That was a big ideological disagreement between them and the Europeans that came over. The Europeans believed in parceling up the land. And the Native Americans weren't savages either. They had big cities with hundreds of thousands of people in it. They just didn't have the same ideas about ownership of the land, which is more of a philosophical thing. You know? How do you prove the land is unowned? They didn't have like a deed to it, but they'd been on it for thousands of years. Does that mean anything?
Jeff doesn't own Albin's shelter or the hills. If voluntary transfer and original homesteading...
Okay, does Alden own the shelter and also the area around it? Okay, what if Jeff wants to do like a big yelly dance right outside the hut? Does Jeff actually own, or does Alden actually own the land like right outside the hut? Or does his property end the nanosecond that you step out from the hut into the land beyond, you know? What about that?
Are the two ways to become an owner of a thing, then most of the state's claims to land ownership are suspect. That's because most of the land was already owned when the state took it by force.
That's very complicated. That really depends. you know that a huge amount of the land owned by the government was traded for, right? Like the Louisiana Purchase. And the Louisiana Purchase was sold by Napoleon because they kind of like abstractly owned that land beforehand. How, I don't even understand this claim. How would a government take possession of land? Like, what do we mean by force exactly? You know, most people like being in areas that the government controls because the government protects them with law, right? Like, so guys, to be clear, like, if you are outside of government land, circa like 1832, they can just kill you. Like, no ambiguity. If you are out in like unincorporated, totally stateless land, they can do literally anything to you and the stuff that you own in a lot of cases. No one will find out, and even if they did, what are they going to do about it? It wasn't illegal where they did all that stuff to you and to your body. You know, most people tend to like government protection because it means that they can have contract negotiations that allow them to, you know, do civilization things. Even corporations like company towns, like operating under the sort of like you know, boundary of government ownership. Because again, if you're a big corporation and you're like building a cool town or whatever with lots of cool stuff in it, and you're outside of government territory, you're outside the borders. Hey guys, guess what? Hey, over yonder that hill, there's a big old private mine outside the official borders of the U.S. state. No law over there. Get your dynamite and guns, boys, because we're going on a raid. We're talking train robberies times 1,000. Not even having to worry about, you know, legal consequences afterwards. It's not illegal. There's no law. Take what you want, you know? No, people tend to like the government, at least in the abstract sense of being under some kind of legal authority.
Or the land was unowned, and instead of homesteading it, the state just threatened to punish users who didn't seek its permission. So the state behaves like Jeff stealing Albin's shelter, or announcing that he owns the hills. But we don't believe ownership works that way. If we want to be consistent, I think we have to admit that the state doesn't own most of the land, and that there is no legitimate agreement between the state and most—
As I've said, this is an incoherent argument. We're arriving at an incoherent summary of an incoherent set of arguments. You know, the premises that have led to this conclusion it doesn't follow.
To the people it taxes. There is no real social contract, just threats of violence.
But if we go back...
That is all contracts. All contracts are threats of violence. Break any contract and find out what happens.
Far enough. There are many pieces of land that were taken by force from someone. I live on land that was stolen less than 200 years ago. Does that mean I don't have a right to live there?
It's a good question. An ancestor of the person the land was stolen from could show up and demonstrate that they have a better claim on the land than you do. But if no surviving ancestors are interested, then it might—
Yo, based? This guy's saying that if a Native American dude shows up and is like, yeah, actually, I used to shit behind a tree right here where my great-great-great-grandfather did. Land back, baby. We're gonna get the whole of Middle America gonna be yeeted back. Let's go. In reality, libertarians don't tend to be pro-land back because it conflicts with their belief that white people are better people than non-white people. So usually you'll find their principles fall apart pretty quickly when it comes to this one.
might qualify as abandoned land. Abandoned land is treated like land that was never owned. It can be homesteaded and passed on through voluntary exchange afterwards.
Okay.
Really? So as a private entity, you can find land that used to be owned by another and then buy it, but the government can't do this because who makes these definitions? How funny, we talked about moral anti-realism before.
That does sort of make sense, but I'm not completely convinced yet. Let me think about it some more.
Whatever it's used for, and however it's justified, taxation depends on a chain of increasingly unpleasant demands and punishments,
Yes,
ultimately backed by deadly force. Some people believe the state maintains mass threats of violence against peaceful people, that it illegitimately claims ownership of the land we live on, and that it's an aggressive institution incompatible with a truly civil society.
This is a nice bit of like corpo-style propaganda. This is 10 years old, but it's pretty well made. I mean, the arguments are dog shit, but there's no good libertarian argument really, so.
Do a web.
Here's a better video on how taxes work from a leftist perspective. Oh, so it's 5 hours long. 31 minutes debunking the mainstream theory of money. Nope. This. Absolutely not. Also, respectfully, why would I ever listen to a leftist on economic theory, okay? They had one guy who got it right. Exactly one. He wrote 3 volumes, then died, all right? Every economic opinion I've ever heard from a leftist since then has been horseshit.
Web search for some of these terms if you're interested in learning more.
Unlearning economics is pretty based, yeah. But wouldn't warlords take over? Yes. Good meme. All right, fair, unorthodox. Fair is fair. That was a good video to go over. Thank you. Now the links all come out. Wax Newman and Paul DSSB. One brain cell. Oh, not unorthodox. Sorry, Deism accountant. Sorry, I knew you both had long names. Yeah. You both had names of similar length. You're both white names. It's kind of like a integer underflow, you know? My brain has to do little tricks. We have to do like little float imprecision at the margins to maintain all the knowledge that I have of chatters. Overflow, you mean? Well, it can be both, I guess. No, the radical dino. Hold on. Amazing masterpiece of a video. True. Sad reality. Government have gunsted our land from a Twilight Sparkle? 3D render. Is that Twilight Sparkle? That's not Applejack, right? Applejack is orange. That is? Okay. Yeah, I'm 18 and love your shit. We know. What I don't understand, if there's no money that people are being forced to pay, how do you prevent people from breaking the law? A stupid question, but let's see what the answer is. Oh, god damn it. The classic libertarian response, linking to a Friedman video. Rights enforcement without government. 3 minutes? We can knock this one out.
I imagine a society where there is no government, where each individual...
That's great, Friedman. That's great.
...is the customer of a firm that sells him the service of protecting his rights and settling his disputes.
So, like paying taxes to a government. So, I don't believe in paying taxes to a government. I want you to have to give money to an agency that'll defend you from the aggression of others, using their ability to commit violence. Jesus Christ.
And this raises an obvious problem, which is if I have a dispute with you and we have different rights enforcement agencies, different firms.
I do like how both of the firms are hot babes. If this is what libertarianism offers, then I am warming up to it a little bit.
How do we settle the dispute? And people imagine that it can't possibly work because the two firms end up fighting each other. And my response to that is that warfare is expensive. It produces rather unpredictable results. So from the standpoint of both firms, it makes much more sense
to form a behind-the-scenes monopoly where you all create a cabal and agree upon a shared set of rules so that you can evenly negotiate any disputes between people with different rights enforcement corporations. And then, you know, this oligarchy of people who have collectively, privately, or publicly agreed on a set of rules could operate as the de facto, what's the term for an entity that has a monopoly on violence within a given area? You know, the people who enforce the law. I don't know. I'm kind of blanking on this.
To agree on a private court and arbitration.
Oh my God. Okay, we're just going to go one step further then. Yeah, okay. A private court.
Agency that will settle disputes between them and whose verdicts they will abide by. And
why? Why would they abide by them? What? It's a private court. What if they just went to a different private court? What if a person kept like appealing these decisions over and over again, and by going to different private courts or hiring like their own cronies and be like, yeah, this is a private court and it's somebody they trained. What if they don't show up? What happens then? What happens then? What happens then?
And then the question is, what enforces that agreement, given that in this imaginary society there is no government to enforce contracts?
Libertarians will really be like, yeah, I don't like governments. I actually like something much worse. What if we took a government and we got rid of it and we recreated it bit by bit, but worse in every conceivable way, you know?
And the answer is, it is being enforced by what's sometimes referred to as the discipline of constant dealings.
That sounds reliable.
The fact that they're repeat players. And so my firm knows that if when it loses a case, when its client loses a case, it doesn't go along with that verdict, then the next time that the other firm's client loses a case, it won't go along, and they're back having to fight each other.
Oh, you mean the thing that happened all the time with neighboring warlords back before we developed the modern nation state, like nonstop? You mean the normal thing that was all of human history up until we developed like the current system for arbitration on a nation level, on a national level? Like, there are only two outcomes here. Either these separate rights enforcement agencies. God, imagine having to pay monthly dues to something called that, a rights enforcement agency. Jesus. Either they bicker and they never agree on anything, and functionally you only actually get protection for your rights from people who are subscribed to the same system as you, or alternatively, you know, they just form a cabal behind the scenes, which is also what companies like this tend to do.
Other or engage in some other less.
Like, why wouldn't they create a cabal? What market incentive would there be for them not to? There's no government to break up a monopoly, right? So first of all, why couldn't there just be a monopoly? Why couldn't one of these rights enforcement corporations, which has an army, by the way, why couldn't they just kill the opposition? What would stop them? No, seriously, what would stop them? There's no government. You need to understand, they just have an army. Or if they didn't kill each other, why not form a cartel? Why not all unify and merge into one single one? What market incentive would there be for them not to? After all, there's no other power for people to defer to. They're the rights enforcement agency, for one. And for two, what they offer, which is essentially, let's be clear here, they're offering a mafia racket. Pay up to us and we'll make sure you stay safe. This is literally just racketeering. This is the exact... Is that the term, racketeering? A mafia protectorate? What's the term? Is racketeering the term for that, or am I thinking of a different thing? I think racketeering is different from forming a racket. Extortion? Or is it racketeering? Yeah. Protection racket. Yeah. Extortion. Okay, yeah. Wonderful. I love being right. So rare. You know, like we're literally just talking about what the mafia did. And guys, do you know what the mafia did? Different competing houses would actually stay out of each other's territory, and you would only be safe within the given area that they had control over, except in the areas where they all just formed a big cartel and worked together. The reason I'm saying there are only two options is because that's what happened. Those are the only two incentives. Like corporations will act in their own best interest for the most part, except when they went to war. Yes, they did go to war sometimes, and lots of people died, you know? There are still, like, massive, protracted gang wars in like, Mexico and shit, you know? Yeah, you don't want mafia wars, except the mafia aren't just the racketeers. They're also the people who moderate your legal disputes. Jesus Christ. But why wouldn't they just kill everyone else? Like, you know, assuming they can't compete on a market level because they don't want to, because they decide that it would be easier to kill everyone else, why not just do that? At the very least, there would be regional monopolies, where if you live in a given area, there would only be one available rights enforcement agency because they'd be the only ones with jurisdiction in that region. So that's why we have, like, cute girls in, like, you know, weird racing outfits representing these rights enforcement agencies, because we're literally just describing cyberpunk. Warfare is profitable for the victor. Yeah, Econoboy, the idea that, like, no, these big militarized corporations would never fight, that wouldn't be profitable. Well, it's very profitable to the winner, actually, if you think about it, which is why war ever happens. Like, what do you mean?
Satisfactory way of settling their disputes. So in that society, law itself is being produced on the market.
Why wouldn't one of these corporations just kill the other ones and then kill the judges? Seriously, why wouldn't they? Who's going to stop them?
That is to say, each arbitration agency wants to have a set of rules and procedures such that rights enforcement agencies will want to use their...
That's something you love to hear. Hey, our judges are altering the way they arbitrate disputes to attract more attention from corporations because they literally get paid by the case. That sounds like a phenomenal... So wouldn't that incentivize, then, the judges to form extremely selective and biased and partial, arbitration strategies that would prefer whatever regional power there would be? How could you possibly create any kind of, like, private competing rights enforcement agency? Lamau, by the way. Lamau. How could you, when they would be entering onto a scene where every judge would already effectively be bought out by their regional power holder?
Their services. Each rights enforcement agency wants to contract with arbitration agencies that have rules and policies such that the customers of the rights enforcement agency want to...
By the way, we're listening to a talk right now from somebody who's considered an intellectual in this sphere, David Friedman. Just in case you were thinking like, oh, that last video that we watched was just like a dumb YouTuber, libertarian or whatever. No, this is the apex of their thinking. This is as good as it gets.
To be under them. So in effect, you've got a market where people are trying to design legal systems for customers. You might argue the same thing is true in a democratic political system, that the laws are made by a legislature and the legislators want to do things the voters will like. But in the democratic political system...
In a democratic political system, you know, that democratic process keeps getting subverted by the presence of corporations who use monetary incentives to lobby, buy out the interests of politicians. Our solution to this corrosive influence capitalism has on democracy is to simply get rid of the democracy and make corporations the only power, you know? Much in the same way that, like, we notice that bridges over time are deteriorated by the presence of rust, you know? The existence of rust seems to cause a structural issue to bridges. Now, we could design a bridge that is more durable or that rusts less, or a kind of metal alloy that doesn't rust as easily, but what if instead we simply built a bridge out of rust? Then it couldn't rust anymore. You know, like how do you oxidize more iron when all of the iron is already
the right things?
This is true to an extent. This is the this sort of reasserts the importance of local reform and local government. I do agree with that. Also, another good solution to this would be corporate democracy, because, you know, you might not be able to influence your nation of 330 million that much with a single vote, but if you're doing votes in a, you know, a break room with like a dozen other employees, you know, you could have quite a bit of power in a system that, you know, has quite a bit of influence over your life. Yeah, I saw that we effed for a second. Sorry, guys, that was OBS, not YouTube.
So that means that in order for the individual...
Vosh, you're missing the big one. What happens to you if you can't afford any rights organization? Oh, the answer is implicit. You die. That's so take it as a granted that, like, underlying every libertarian argument is the assumption that there is a de facto caste system where people who are poor functionally must live as slaves, with very few legal rights, because everything is kept behind wealth. And there's really no reason why the powers that be would allow for high levels of economic mobility in the lower classes, because why would they? Why would that benefit them in any way? You know, is it really that stupid? I try to get an aneurysm every time I try to understand this because I can't believe... No, it really is. Yep, it is. There is no like, well, what if this guy had a phenomenal argument? Every single one of them, from Sol to Milton to you know, all of them, you know? It is that stupid, genuinely. And it's almost entirely motivated by racism. Seriously, you can look into its history. American libertarianism, which is what we're dealing with here, because libertarianism was originally a socialist term. Liberty? Huh? Huh? You know? No, it's not about profit. Libertarianism historically hasn't been fronted very aggressively by the most moneyed classes in society, because this wouldn't be good for corporations either. Corporations like stability, and a state affords stability. Only an idiot running a company, even a railroad baron back 120 years ago, would think, I know what would make my life easier if there was no such thing as a government. There has been the occasional like instance of an attempted coup, or like a corporate like nut job who thinks libertarianism is the right way to handle things. But for the most part, smart corporate owners, smart millionaires, smart billionaires, smart members of the bourgeoisie understand that the state is a useful tool that promotes stability, complacency in the proletariat, and allows them to maneuver more cautiously than they could through the brutish system that libertarians advocate. American libertarianism has always been about black people. It really is that simple. See, democracy, whatever its relationship to capital, does, at least in the long run, trend towards egalitarianism. At the very least, there's a relationship between those two forces. There's a reason why, when you take a look at the angry screeds of libertarians, their big issues almost always come down to the welfare state and not the military-industrial complex. You know, we spend a lot of money on our military, on our police, but they don't take issue with that. In fact, they often defend higher spending on both of those institutions. Instead, it is any system which redistributes wealth that they take issue with. Now, a lot of that is classism against the poor, but a lot of it, a huge amount of it, is, you know, black people. There's a reason why American libertarianism kicked off after the Civil War, when socialist libertarianism and its ideological influences came about from earlier. Also, people who defend this are just working class people. Yeah, because working class people are often quite racist.
Voter to do what democracy, in a sense, expects him to do, he's got to bear sizable costs, and he gets essentially no payoff for doing that. And generally, people are very reluctant to do things that are expensive and do them no good. So
this is incoherent. It's expensive to vote? What are you talking about? Irrational babbling. This is an anti-democracy screed, but it's not even coherent enough to respond to, really.
they don't. Whereas in the system I'm describing, the individual has to some degree the ability to choose what rights enforcement agency and what set of laws he's on.
By what they could afford and what region they're in. You're literally choosing your mafia racket. Also, what differences would there be? What is there, like a human rights bonus package where some are like more expensive and you like this one will be like, so the center rights enforcement agency will protect you from murder, you and your family. So if you're murdered or there's an attempted murder, they'll send goons over to help protect you and investigate. But rape, meh, they don't really care. You know, they're the budget agency. So if somebody breaks into your house and has a gun and they hold you down and rape your wife in front of you over and over, as long as she lives, well, you're paying for the budget rights enforcement agency. You don't have all the rights. You have the, you know, economy package. You'll need a little bit more money to afford the other rights. Yes, anti-rape microtransactions. That's the future right there.
Under the individual consumer.
By the way, what I'm saying right now sounds like a joke. I hope you all understand that it's not. Like, I'm literally just describing what the logical, like, what do you think they're implying when they say you would have choice in what rights enforcement agency you want? What do you think that means? Like, I'm not even making a joke.
Has a rational incentive to be reasonably well informed and to act on that information.
Well, do I want to spend 20% of my income protecting me and my family if ever they're raped? That's true. That credit where credit's due. I bet you the average Joe would end up being very well informed on the exact price and incentive structure of their local you know, mafia rackets.
And the fact that he has those incentives mean that the providers, both the rights enforcement agencies and the arbitration agencies, have an incentive to provide the services that the customers want.
You know, the real most likely outcome is just that the wealthiest and most powerful rights enforcement agency would just buy and pay like settlements to people who are violated within the, like, rather than beefing with or arbitrating with other agencies, they would literally just be like, you know, oh, well, here's a small settlement because it's easier to do that than to go through this whole like appealable arbitration process with these judges or whatever. What's to prevent corporate consolidation? Absolutely nothing. Lost in this convo is who prints the money, Lamau. I think that people like Friedman literally think that you should be using company script. Like everyone would live on these big like mega towns owned by companies that would print their own script. And if you want to like buy something over in the next town, then good luck. Or maybe the new grift is cryptocurrency, actually, I think, because cryptocurrency is like the new answer libertarians have to like explain how they're going to solve this unsolvable problem in the absence of fiat currency or whatever. Well, that was cool. Usually when the statist draws that card, you can say, what do you think happens when the Chinese and Frenchmen have disagreement? Most people have no idea how it resolves, but know it resolves somehow, and that's enough. What? That's the top comment? What does that even mean? Yeah, so anyway, this is pretty much all just about racism. Just always keep that in mind. Remember the time that I debated that libertarian presidential candidate, and I was like, hey, I've noticed that you guys are really insistent about removing the Civil Rights Act. How about you? And he was like, yeah, you caught me. Yeah, me too. Rand Paul wants to.